we're going to be talking about defensive versus supportive communication climates by Jack Gibb. And as we go through these 6 pairings of communication approaches, I would like to use this as a checklist for yourself. See how you compare and contrast. Are you mostly communicating in supportive ways or mostly in defensive ways, especially in groups? And we are working out of Beebe and Masterson's book on communicating in small groups. I'll put a link to that in the description below this video. So let's get into the details. So Jack Gibb was a social psychologist, and he observed groups for several years, and he noticed that certain types of people communicated either in ways that were supportive or defensive in their group situations. In other words, defensive climates were counterproductive because people would spend time defending themselves and wrestling with other people in the conversation rather than advancing the group's goals. So it was a big distraction, and it threw people and the groups off course. On the other side of the coin, Jack Gibb noticed that some people communicated in supportive ways that cultivated a supportive group climate that allowed the group to progress and focus on the task at hand. And there are 6 pairings of these. They are opposite sides of a continuum. The first pairing is evaluation versus description. Evaluation is where we use you language that is aimed at critiquing the other person or critiquing their ideas. You might hear people say, "You're wrong about that." Or they come after the idea. They might say, "That's a ridiculous idea." Here we're evaluating the other person or their ideas. And of course, that's going to make them feel as if they have to defend themselves. In contrast, we want to use description, where we use I language that focuses on the speaker's thoughts and ideas. So your own ideas are what you're focusing on. You're not pointing the finger with you. You're saying I, and that really lowers the temperature in the room. So you might say, "I'm not understanding yet. Can you tell me more?" Or "I see the situation from a different angle." This is where, by taking on the responsibility of your interpretation of your point of view, you're not asking the person to defend themselves or their ideas. In fact, there's a whole informal area in communication studies, and certainly out there in professional development, they talk about using I language. And it's grounded in Jack Gibb's first pairing, you language, which is evaluation, or I language, which is description. The second pairing is control versus problem orientation. So some people really aim to control others or force the issue with their communication. They might say, for example, "Don't be difficult, just do it this way and let's move on." So they're trying to push the other people in the group by saying, "Hey, you're being difficult." And that's like a power move, a controlling move. You might have someone say, "Well, unfortunately, we have no choice." They're trying to block things off and make you go in the direction that they want to go. In fact, I had a supervisor years ago who routinely used to say things like that. "Unfortunately, we have no choice." When really there were choices. The supervisor was just trying to control and did so in a variety of ways. So on the other side of the coin is where communication is problem-oriented and genuinely aims to solve a problem for the group's benefit. So the word problem, of course, sounds like, oh, there being a problem. But what it means is their communication is focused on solving the problem. They're not aimed at controlling the other person. You're coming shoulder to shoulder with the other communicators in the group, and you're trying to work on solving the problem. So you hear people say, "Let's brainstorm some ideas," or "What do you think of this direction?" They're trying to work on the problem, and that becomes the focus of the conversation. That brings the temperature down in the room and is more supportive communication. The third pairing is using strategy versus being spontaneous. So some people communicate in very staged or scripted or strategic ways that's often very self-serving, and it's meant to put the other communicators in the group on the defensive or at a disadvantage. So some people will deliberately pitch a fit, as the expression goes. They act very upset in a calculated way. Often this is pre-planned or some kind of dramatic reaction, and they're going for a reaction from the group to, in a way, because they're being strategic, they're trying to get the group to steer the group toward their desired direction or outcome. That's strategic. Now, you see this in politics all the time, but you also see it in office politics where people will react like this to put the other people off balance. Instead, Supportive communication is spontaneous, and those reactions are often more genuine and honest and don't try to hide some alternate agenda. So you want to be more spontaneous and react in the moment. Don't try to pre-plan how you're going to react. It's going to come across the wrong way and create more defensiveness. The fourth pairing is neutrality and empathy. So the word neutral to me on its face sounds okay, but what we mean is acting indifferent, neutral, or detached when really we should be demonstrating some care. So we're not caring when we should. So people might say, well, that doesn't matter, or what's that have to do with me? In fact, I know somebody personally who, if the conversation is drifting in a direction that they don't see themselves in, they will say out loud, what's that got to do with me? And that can really increase tension in the group because it's acting very neutral, like they just don't care about the opinions and what's going on with the other people in the group. So what you want to do is be empathetic, and this is where you're interested and you demonstrate that you care about others. You might say things like, I hear you. And while you're talking to people and you're listening to them talk, you make good eye contact. You show that you're listening well. That's empathetic communication, and that will create a supportive group climate. The next pairing is superiority versus equality. You don't want to act superior to others. It's going to put them off. So some communication does attempt to position the speaker as better than or superior to other people. They use words like, obviously, this is the best direction, or this is my area, so I know. Again, this is kind of a power move, trying to say, look, I'm the one who knows best, so you should listen to me, not the rest of the people in the group. That's going to turn other people off. It's going to increase the temperature in the room and make it more defensive. What you want to do instead is demonstrate equality. We don't like people to put us in our place. We want to feel like we're equal, like we're on par with others in our value. So you hear people who are communicating equally say things like, all points of view are valuable, or I respect that point of view. That's how that sounds. And the final pairing, certainty versus provisionalism. It's important to have a point of view. We'll give you that. However, you don't want to sound overly rigid and communicate with too much certainty, because that can come across as if you're trying to push people to take sides on an issue. So I've heard people say things like, I'm not going to change my mind. And that can really whoa, where are we going with this? It sounds like you're about to have a huge argument. And every once in a while, of course, you have to have a point of view and you have to stick to your guns sometimes. But if this is the norm for a communicator, where they're very certain and overly rigid about everything they say, it's going to create some hostility in the group. Instead, what we want to do is communicate with more provisionalism, be flexible or open in the way you talk to other people. You might literally hear people say that word. They might say, I'm open to hearing more of your thinking on that. That openness communicates much more supportive tone in the room, and other people will join the conversation and feel like they're welcome in it. So some key points here. As a member or a leader in groups, it's important to be aware of your communication choices. Your behavior can influence the communication climate for better or for worse in predictable ways. If you communicate in these defensive ways, that's the result you're going to get. And if you communicate in more supportive ways, that will be the direction that the group goes in. So ideally, your group conversations should be woven with supportive communication. So question of the day, as you look at these 6 pairings, which side do you lean? Do you find yourself and hear yourself communicating in ways that will create a more defensive climate, or do you generally communicate in more supportive ways? I would love to hear your confession and your point of view on yourself using this information in that comment section below. I look forward to reading that. Take care. See you soon.